Today, we're diving deep. We're going to look at the weird, confusing, and sometimes frustrating things people do and decode what's really going on inside their heads.
Of course you have. We all do it. It's almost a reflex, right? We see someone being quiet and we think, oh, they're shy. Or someone cuts right to the point and we label them arrogant. But what if those snap judgments? What if they're not just a little bit wrong, but completely missing the point?
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look beyond those surface-level assumptions. Then, we'll get into some specific behaviors that are all about self-protection. After that, we'll see the mind at work in some pretty unexpected ways. And finally, we'll tie it all together, giving you a totally new way to see the people around you.
All right, let's get into it. The main idea here is super simple, but also kind of profound. What we see on the outside is almost never the full story. Behind nearly every action, there's a brain that's just trying to protect itself, make sense of reality, or just survive whatever pressure it's under.
And this, right here, lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have our quick, easy judgments. Shy, cold, arrogant. But on the other side, there's the hidden truth, a mind that's working overtime just to protect itself and get by. And that gap between the two, that's what we're going to explore today.
Let's start with actions that are, at their core, all about defense, even if they really don't look like it at first.
We've all been there, right? A friend just vanishes, stops replying to texts, goes completely dark, and our first thought is usually, wow, how dramatic. Or, what did I do? We think they're being overly emotional.
But here's the thing. The psychology tells a totally different story. This isn't about drama. It's about being overloaded. The brain has literally hit its processing limit.
There's actually a clinical term for this, emotional burnout. It happens when someone's been under constant mental pressure. Maybe they're always the listener, the problem solver, the one managing everyone else's feelings. Eventually, their social and mental batteries just completely die.
So you can see the process. It begins with all this pressure, which leads to a massive energy drain, and it ends with the brain basically pulling the emergency brake. What looks like them being cold or cruel is actually what you could call a boundary awakening. It's a desperate last-ditch effort to preserve themselves.
Okay, next one. You know that person who, the second you tell them what to do, they do the exact opposite? Even if your advice is solid gold. We just write them off as stubborn.
Well, psychology calls this psychological reactance. And get this, it's not a personality flaw. It's an automatic, totally hardwired instinct that kicks in whenever we feel like our freedom to choose is being threatened.
You can see exactly how it works here. The moment someone feels like their sense of control is being taken away, their brain just instinctively pushes back. They're not trying to be difficult for the sake of it. They are driven by this incredibly deep need to be in the driver's seat of their own life.
All right, let's keep building on this. Now we're going to look at some of the hidden things going on inside our minds and how they bubble up to the surface in some really surprising ways.
Oh man, this one is a classic. We all know someone like this. They have these huge, amazing goals. They can talk for hours about the future they want to build, but then they just don't do anything. And the easy label, the one we all jump to, is lazy.
But the real culprit here is often mental fatigue. See, their brain is never off. They're spending a ton of cognitive energy just planning, imagining scenarios, weighing options. It's like their mind has already run a marathon. So by the time it comes to actually taking physical action, they're already spent. It's not a lack of willpower, it's a completely drained mental battery.
Okay, and speaking of misunderstood behaviors, this next one can be really jarring. Picture this. You're in a super serious, tense, or even sad situation, and someone starts laughing. It feels so wrong, so disrespectful.
But believe it or not, this is a straight-up biological defense mechanism. When the emotional tension from shock or fear gets to be too much for the brain to handle, the nervous system frantically searches for a release valve, and sometimes that valve is laughter.
So here's what's happening under the hood. The brain gets overloaded with emotion. It triggers laughter as a quick way to release that pressure, and that actually activates the body's calming system. It doesn't mean they don't care. In fact, it often means the exact opposite. They're feeling so much that their brain is trying to save them from a total emotional short circuit.
And finally, let's talk about the quiet person in the room. We're sort of trained to think the loudest person is the most confident one, the one in charge. But you know what? Psychology tells us to keep an eye on the quiet one. Because while the loud person is busy seeking validation, the quiet one, they're collecting data.
They're practicing something called observational intelligence. Because their mouth is closed, their mind is wide open. They're noticing the subtle shifts in body language, the changes in tone, all the little details that everyone else is missing.
Their silence isn't a weakness. It's a sign of incredible focus and control. And trust me, when they finally do decide to speak, their words have weight.
So, after all of that, what's the point? How does knowing this actually change anything? Well, it's about making a fundamental shift from judgment to genuine understanding. Let's just recap the big mind shifts here. That friend who disappeared? That's not drama. It's a desperate need for peace. That stubborn coworker? They're fighting for a sense of freedom. That lazy dreamer is likely just mentally exhausted. The nervous laughter is a defense mechanism. And that quiet person in the corner is probably the most observant one in the room. Once you get this, you stop taking everyone's behavior so personally.
And that really brings us to the final, most important question. I want you to think about the people in your life, your friends, your family, your coworkers, maybe even yourself. Now that you have this new lens, who are you going to start seeing with a little more clarity and maybe a lot less judgment?